Hello and welcome to the DreamHack Download, everything gaming under one podcast. In this episode, we're talking about how to balance video games. Thank you to our new sponsor, Simply Nook. Simply Nook featuring Samsung's 970 EVO Plus NVMe storage technology when you need a gaming rig to carry your team to victory.
I always need a good gaming rig to carry me to victory because I need some enhancements. Hello, everybody.
Yeah.
I'm your host, Kyle, and thanks for joining us another episode of the DreamHack Download. Joined again by my wonderful co-hosts, Renessa, JV, and Blaine. Hope you're all doing well while you're listening to this or watching it. Today, we are talking balance. And this is a really big topic in gaming from a lot of different perspectives, but balance is something that we've seen change over the past couple of years in a way that is affecting more and more people every time a patch is added, whether it be the developers themselves that are working to push that patch out or the community that's demanding some new content, or an esports tournament that's going to get screwed over from a patch that just happens. Balance affects us in many different ways.
An esports tournament? Well, what could Kyle be referring to there?
Well, you know, we got one esports tournament that's going on right now that's kind of gaining some momentum, actually.
Yeah.
Our Discord has been blowing up nonstop, and if anyone is staff here at DreamHack, we just get messages all the time from people asking questions. But JV, we have a Fortnite tournament going on. Do you want to tell us how many people we have registered for this thing?
Yeah, 4.
Four? Oh,
Four
man.
people.
We have
That's
4.
so many.
That sounds like we're doing pretty good.
We have a whole squad.
100,000. Over
Holy
400,000.
What?
Shit.
What?
Did you say
What?
400,000?
Yeah, we had
Wow.
over 400,000 people competing in our Fortnite event over this past weekend. Still ongoing. It's kind of crazy. You know, don't get me wrong. I would love to do events in person, just like pretty much everybody else would like to, whenever it's safe again. But it is really fortunate that we live in this beautiful era of the internet that you can just do that. Like, you can just have a 400,000 person Fortnite tournament. You know, like, that's crazy to think about.
That's a lot of volume. And when we were in Anaheim, we did our Fortnite activation in person, and that was a big tournament. But this is a lot of people. How do you handle the sheer volume of 400,000 people coming in?
Everybody saw that, right? Audio
Saw
listeners
nothing.
didn't see that. Blaine heard it.
For audio listeners, I put up
rest
some new sound foam and it's not as high quality as my other sound foam and it just fell off the wall.
Oh my.
It
Yo,
was
this
really
podcast-
shocked by 400,000 people.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
just
Yeah, I
saying.
guess so.
Falling
Just couldn't
down.
handle it.
I think the shitty sound foam is the perfect metaphor for this podcast itself. Just falling off the walls near the beginning consistently. Have we ever hit the intro like super hard off the get-go where it's just been like fire? I feel like we always dilly-dally for at least the first 5 to 7 minutes about just nonsense.
I was just saying,
before
for
we get
people
into
for
these
people who are here based on the title and the thumbnail, we're gonna talk about game balance. We promise. All right, we got collectively between us way too many game obsessions to not have some balanced horror stories for sure.
Absolutely.
True.
Vanessa,
Oh, yeah.
you've got one specifically that you've expressed some disdain around, I think is the appropriate way to say this. Frustration? Rage? Are we saying rage?
Well, okay, we're gonna go with rage because
Okay.
it's not a badly timed update. It's not a bad decision. It's just a game that inspires rage. Anyone want to take a guess what I might be talking about? It's not Dota. Different guess.
Oh, well, I got no guesses
Damn,
then.
you play other games?
Sometimes it happens. We will get to Dota. All right, all right. We will get there. Well, okay. First of all, Dota was broken. Let's start out there. Dota was broken. I had to play other games. Would not work. So I was like, you know what? I beat Dark Souls 3, but I have some DLC I haven't done yet. Which, by the way, you access this DLC halfway through the game. Not end game content. Halfway through the game, you unlock it. I'm like, oh, this won't be a big deal. So I hop into the DLC. I'm like 5 minutes into it, and I am suddenly mobbed by 20-something wolves attacking me from every direction. And not only are there wolves and there's no visibility because it's a blizzard everywhere, there are these weeping women trees firing waves of fire at you. So you have to dodge all the wolves, dodge all the fire. It's Dark Souls, so if there's more than 2 enemies at one time, you're destroyed. And there's quite literally 15 to 20 enemies all on top of me. I have to use all of my Estus. I finally managed to kill everything, like 30 minutes later of just roll everywhere. And then this giant mamma jamma mama wolf comes out from the blizzard, and I'm just like, well, I'm done. Goodbye. Good night. And Dota's still not working, and I'm like, I am not continuing on this DLC right now. So you want to talk about balance? Those wolves are not balanced. And yeah, so Dark Souls 2, not known for their ease of playing.
I'll be honest, Renessa, halfway through that story, I forgot if you were talking about the Dark Souls 3 DLC or if you were just in the middle of tripping on mushrooms for the first time and explaining everything you were seeing. Like, what the
just wandering through the woods. It's blizzardy weather out there. Yeah, it's not summertime or anything like that anywhere in the world. But yeah, that's Renessa's, I think, good journey is the word you use there, JV.
A journey. Yeah,
a journey.
I will say the mid. It is. I like the fact that the DLC is kind of in the middle of a game because it makes it so that if you do like a new game plus to coincide with the fact that a DLC just dropped, you don't have to beat the whole game all over again to access it. Right? You can just be like,
you might want to
get to this part, get my bearings, and then wolf. Yeah, and then you get wolved. That's not the whole DLC, is it? I'm assuming the slamming Mama Jamma Sonic update or whatever the hell you called it, like that. That's only the very beginning.
It's not even a boss. It's just a really big wolf you have to fight.
Is it like a?
It's probably one
like
of those
a hive mind kind of thing where you like kill the big wolf and then like the other wolves die, or
no. It is though. If you aggro one wolf, it starts howling and aggroes all the other wolves. So that's fun.
To do this stealthy is what I hear.
But you
and
can't,
you may
have just but yeah, I also did not expect that, so I would play it differently if I ever chose to. But
what I heard is don't let Renessa watch your dogs. That's what I've learned from this wonderful DLC that Dark Souls provided for us.
It's like this big.
You have a dog named Bentley?
I have one named Bentley that's about this big too. I feel like that's a common
He's super
thing.
cute.
Enough about Renessa's Dark Souls, though. I think we've kind of beat that to death. And this is a little bit. It's not exactly a balance, but it is new content that's being added, and it has to be taken into account when you're getting into the game. And if that content is super hard for mid-tier Dark Soul, or I guess mid playthrough Dark Souls, then that may be something you do have to come back to later, and maybe it may be in-game content. For me, it for sure would be in-game content because I'm bad at those kinds of dances. But we don't only dance. That's not the only kinds of games that Renessa also plays, I guess. But Blaine, when we're talking about painful balance updates and moments where you've had a little bit of a tension point in your gameplay, does one come to mind for you?
So for me, one of the biggest ones that comes to mind actually was way back in the day when I was still playing StarCraft 2. This was in Wings of Liberty days. I was a high gold Terran. I was just a smidge away from plat. And there was, at the time, Terran mech builds were some of the most powerful and strong, good builds. And I remember I was clutching on a build where, I mean, it was pretty much just all mech with a little bit of bio. And all of a sudden, I got back into the game after a balance patch, didn't pay any attention to the balance, and I was trying to figure out why my units all of a sudden were just dog shit. And it was because Blizzard had done a really big patch that just really just scaled back mech like crazy. And that was the time when bio became the thing to do now. So I had to completely switch my build over, lost a bunch of points, and it was very painful. It was one of the things that actually made me quit playing competitive StarCraft, because I was just like, you know what? I'm not going to keep up with this stuff. I have other things to do in my life.
Esports balance patches are so... I mean, I think that's what we're going to end up talking a lot about today, because games as a service often tend to be esports games that need to be patched really regularly. Gosh, and it's like you have to have them for the sake of competitive meta and everything, but man, for a casual player, they can be really draining.
Well, and for my StarCraft days, I was a photon cannon rusher, and I may have hit diamond at one point with photon cannon rushing in solo. I'm a terrible human being is all that I have to say there. But for some reason, people at Blizzard love that photon cannon rush meta because I don't think they've changed a lot about that. They've changed some of the timings and they've changed some of the build orders that you have to get to, but it's still always been doable if you can figure out the new mechanic, which I think is something they should have patched a long time ago because the viability of that thing can just be daunting. But at the same time, they'll take smaller patches and go in there and tweak out these characters that were super strong, and these minor adjustments may have just absolutely nerfed them. Like you said, we see it a lot through many different styles of games, and as the game gets more and more complex, there's so much more to balance. TF2 is one that I think has a very jaded history of dealing with patches because the community is so rooted and entrenched in this vanilla version of TF2 that every single patch that the developer Valve puts out for this wonderful game, everyone's like, well, more hats, that's all we get. There's no competitive integrity added to it. They just keep diminishing the competitive integrity of the game, in their opinion, by adding more unbalanced items to appease the community's desire for just more shit at the end of the day. So there's a divide that has been created with the casual TF2 fan and the hardcore TF2 player to where there is no longer any crossover between their play because the hardcore competitive player will only play the sixes format in the way that it was originally released vanilla, or you may get the full Highlander mode where people play one of each class. But when you go into the competitive, the casual side of it, it's just hats like Slacks was talking about, hats, and hats. That's pretty much what that game has become from the community side of things. So when you're trying to balance between the two of those, you get that struggle of which part of your community do you listen to? And TF2 has always just been so polarizing when it comes down to what the community actually wants. And the vocal esports side never gets serviced, while the community who's not really wanting anything, demanding anything from Valve for TF2, they just happen to get things every so often, are happy whenever it happens. So Valve just keeps going that direction, it feels like.
Man, that's a tough part though, right? And this is again one of those times where I just think about how happy I am as just a dumb marketing person, just a dumb orangutan brain marketing person, and not somebody who has to big brain it on game design and game balance and stuff like that, right? I'm so grateful because as somebody who works in game design, when you're talking about balance, you can't just balance for like the top 0.1%, right? You have to balance essentially for every single tier of play because people's perception of the game changes drastically depending on the level at which they are playing, right? Like,
absolutely.
Well, but see, that's the thing. So that's actually a really great question to think about more into the episode, right? Because game companies have all kinds of statistics they can measure. They can see how long someone plays their very first session that they sign in. They can see how frequently they play after they download the game in the first week. They can look at retention numbers. They can look at retention numbers for high skill. They can see the implications of their balance changes. And they have to make the decision, do you favor the new player experience and long-term retention, or do you favor competitive integrity? Because what you're saying, Valve balances to the top 0.00001%. They very much do in everything that they do. Occasionally, there are a small component of a patch that will cater to a new player experience or a lower thing that doesn't affect the pro tier, but it is almost exclusively centered around professional level play. Whereas other games are much more focused on the casual player experience, right? Like Fortnite in-game concerts and all the community stuff they do. That doesn't have anything to do with competitive. That has everything to do with making their game fun. So I think that's just like a developer question for that.
No, it's a good point too. It's a good point. I think it's just so tough to walk the line, really.
Yeah.
Right? Like walking the line and trying to find that threshold in regards to how you make that beginner level experience seem fair, right? And how you make that intermediate experience seem fair, and how you make that advanced or top level player experience seem fair. Because again, like, it's not like you're balancing one game. I really don't believe it's like you're balancing one game. I think it's like balancing multiple different games simultaneously, because the game changes depending on who's playing it. Like when I was a kid playing Smash, right? And our next door neighbor would come over, he'd be like, "Oh, Samus is cheap in Smash 64. They got the gun and the chain and the chain they can grab." Samus, spoiler alert, in Smash 64 is among, if not the worst character in the game at a top level.
I'll still body you with Samus, though.
No, you will not. No, you will not.
Yeah, well.
The Samus Falcon matchup is not in your favor, my friend.
You're right, it's not, but I'll beat you.
We'll just have to distract
Challenge
you with
accepted,
something.
I think.
Look,
Clearly with cookies. Those
Or-
little soft baked cookies with the pastel frosting. Blaine's just gonna chuck them at you, and that's how he'll
you're
win.
still thinking about that meme.
Oh, those sugar cookies.
Oh, for the record, I do have an N64 with a copy of Smash Bros. And controllers. We'll make it happen.
Perfect. Next off this week, we'll bring that. We'll bring some Mario Kart for Renessa. She'll beat us on Rainbow Road and lose every other match. It's gonna be perfect, guys. Great
I have
balance.
Oh, I'll
ground
destroy everybody at
every
Mario
single
Kart
track
too.
in that game. All right. I'm not just a Rainbow Road aficionado.
I think that was actually part of your title on the podcast, was Rainbow Road Specialist.
I mean,
You know?
I've spent a lot of time on that track, but really, I'm a Wario Stadium specialist. If we're really gonna
That's
get
fair.
into
Ooh,
it.
that one's fun.
Yeah, that's
Great
the
level.
best track. So yes.
Oh yeah,
It is.
I agree.
It's objectively the best track.
I feel like our podcast has become off balance, so I'm going to try and bring it back to balance.
Ah, the host doing some on the fly
Oh
balancing.
no!
Oh no.
So JV, we haven't heard like a positive spin on this. Like we've heard painful balance updates, but there's also a bit of a different direction that this can happen with these patches that these developers are placing on these games or putting out on these games. When we look at some of the games that started out awful, just terrible, they have the ability to patch. When you're talking about an N64 game, they didn't have the ability to patch those things. So now we can take a bad game and spice it up a little bit. And I know you're talking on the Tonight Show about this a little bit, of some of the bad games that were just bad games with them. E.T. is one example that comes to mind. But with the ability to update games after they've been released and more of that living form of art, are there some examples that come to mind of redemption arcs?
Oh, plenty. I mean, Blaine already knows. Fallout 76 is a pretty good example right off the gate. I mean, let's be real. This was by far, in a way, Bethesda's worst launch and one of the worst launches in gaming, period. The fact that they're able to come out of that smoldering pile of just absolute wreckage with what they have now, I think is remarkable, to say the least, right? The game still has a way to go for sure, but it's such a strong improvement from what it used to be, right? Battlefront 2 is another great example of this also, right? Where the game literally like showed up and almost every aspect of the game itself was broken, right? You have the infamous EA comments on Reddit, which I believe was, if not, may still be the most downvoted comment in Reddit history, of them trying to justify the pay-to-win scheming that went on with that particular game.
I forgot about that comment. That was beautiful. Oh man, that got memed so much.
Yo, what was it? What was the exact wording that they used? I'm muting my mic for 1 second.
All right, JV's gonna do some research. No, that was that was something.
While we dig into the full darkness that is the EA's launch of Battlefront, this idea of these games being balanced and the developers are doing what they feel like is best, right?
Mm-hmm.
They really are trying to move these games forward in a direction that they're looking for that feedback and trying to answer those questions that are out there or make the game just better for everybody that's trying to be there. So Blaine, Destiny 2 was one game that you have spent a lot of time in, and I know you stream regularly, and you're very active in the guild, and you've got a really kick-ass bomber jacket that I'm jealous of. So with Destiny 2, I know Bungie's had their own struggles with trying to make this game fit what the community is asking for, because it is a newer type of game overall. Even though it's the second iteration, there's a couple of them out there. They're still expanding that universe, but I feel like they're getting into that rhythm now, that it has a consistency to it where the community can expect good things to come whenever Bungie makes an update. Before that wasn't the case. what have they done to define that difference between a bad update to a consistent content path that they're on now?
Well, Destiny's, I mean, there's been a lot of ups and downs, and Destiny's another one of those ones where the launch of Destiny 2 was subpar. I wouldn't say it was awful, but there was a lot of things that were missing and some changes that they made, which are reportedly due to things that Activision wanted, and they're now separate, wholly self-published at this time. So what's happened basically since they became self-published is the balance passes have become more frequent, more positive, and generally speaking, they're really listening very well to the community. Bungie's always been extremely community oriented, but we're in a place now where these balance patches are coming in ways that we haven't even expected. And I could get into the details, but we'd be talking about it for an hour or so. But long story short, the response to community sentiment and what goes into the game has drastically improved over the last year. Like I said, too, especially since the switch away from Activision, it's been incredible for them. And we're seeing Bungie, I like to refer to it as Bungie Unchained, because now they can do whatever they want with the game, essentially, and it has resulted in some amazing things.
Absolutely amazing work when they have no one to tell them what to do. That's where they're at their finest, in my opinion. And I'm so glad that they're finally getting to that stride again. And when I first started playing Destiny 2 when it launched, and I haven't played it since it launched, the PvP side of things was a big deal. Is PvP still as big of a deal in Destiny 2, or has it gone more PvE?
Yeah.
PvP is still a big deal, and they actually have brought Trials of Osiris, the pinnacle PvP experience from Destiny 1, over to Destiny 2. Trials of Osiris is incredible. It's heart pumping. It's high level PvP, and you will learn very quick how bad you are. I consider myself a pretty good PvPer, but there are some people doing some stuff in that game mode that absolutely trounces me during a lot of games. But there's also a really big problem with cheating right now in Destiny PvP, and that makes me not want to play. I would say anytime I play Destiny 2 PvP, I will run into at least one cheater for each hour of gameplay, if not more.
That's such a problem
it's rough.
With so many games. Any FPS game has got issues with that, where I think it's a little easier to tell when someone is cheating in an FPS game, especially because a lot of times you get to see the kill camera. MOBAs, it's a little harder to tell because it's straight up harder to cheat just because of the mechanics of the game. It's an unfortunate aspect that my heart goes out to developers in that case, right? Because it's playing whack-a-mole, but you've got one hammer and 100,000 moles popping up in every single crack, and so there's only so much you can do. And gosh, that's another aspect of balancing.
Anti-cheats are the only answer right now, and they're not even that great because we're still seeing a lot of commentary around how Valorant still struggles with trying to get a good piece of software behind their community to prevent these things from happening in the cheating realm. I know Call of Duty, the second more games into on PC, it's instantly hacked and instantly being exploited. Yeah. So a lot of these games are constantly struggling with that. So how do you balance something along those lines when you're really stuck trying to fight a war versus people that are trying to exploit your game, and then trying to keep the people happy that are spending money on your game, or hopefully spending money on your game? You're stuck in between banning accounts and getting rid of people that you just know of. And if it's a free-to-play game, that lasts for like 2 days until they make new accounts. And if it's a paid game, now you've really upsetted potentially a lot of your community that are not able to play that game anymore, even though they may not have been directly cheating. They may have just been lumped into that. Or for my case, some of my hardware on my computer just doesn't work because I have to turn off other software controllers when I have Vanguard on.
Yeah, that's a good question, because cheating's in everything, right? So if we're developers and
not fighting games,
okay, but we're happy.
Checkmate! No wall fighting games, bro. I'm done. Podcast over, y'all. Cheating's in everything.
All right, so JV's out of the conversation.
I'm filled with a sense of pride and accomplishment. That was the comment, by the way. I fucking found it. It took me so long, but The intent was to provide players with a sense of pride and accomplishment for unlocking different heroes.
Gosh.
Over 600,000 downvotes, y'all. Holy.
That's impressive. Okay.
I love that comment so
Yep,
much.
I had forgotten how good it was.
It's so EA.
Oh.
Oh, I
Okay.
meme on that all the time, especially when I'm playing Destiny with my clan.
Oh, man.
Okay, so let's say we're developers, right? And the problem before us is cheating. You can do nothing and just hope that it's not a big enough problem. You can have decently invasive software like Vanguard that kind of messes up some other stuff on your PC and you have to do some weird things. You can do mass ban waves. You can say you're doing mass ban waves and lie about it so that your user base feels good. What do? Like, what's the choice here?
I'm ban hammering people every single day of the week. I'm IP banning all the way through. If they are reported cheating multiple times, I just don't care. You can contest it all you want. And if it's a real case and you weren't, then figure it out. But if people are cheating and ruining the gaming experience for everyone else, I have no sympathy for anyone doing that.
All right, so that costs you several hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional customer support every year.
Correct.
To make that choice.
Yep.
Yep.
That was going to be my point. Is it's a very difficult question, not only because it's hard to do in terms of integrating anti-cheat, having a security team to review, reports and all that. You also end up needing additional people for customer support, like you mentioned, because you're going to get people in ban waves that were not actually cheating. And it was just, they got mass reported because they were super good. And then, somebody on the security team made a mistake, right? So there's so many headaches with this, and it's something that Bungie has been working very hard on. I go back to Destiny as an example, but it's a good example because they have created what I think is at least a good cadence where they do a huge ban wave, but they don't say anything about it until they might mention it. And they'll do this big ban wave, and then they'll wait for a long time. And part of the strategy here, which I think is very interesting, is that it's about gathering data and then not talking about your anti-cheat plans or what you're doing,
so you
other
can't
than,
exploit
hey,
it.
we're working on it.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So there's this constant cat and mouse game that I think is just wild between people who are developing cheats and the developers. It's developer versus developer.
Yeah.
It's really weird. And it's crazy.
Is there, I know Google will do this sometimes, and actually a lot of tech companies will do it, where they'll host contests or competitions for people who
A
can
hackathon.
like hack into their systems. Right? Is that something that game designers and game devs are doing too, where it's like, hey, like if you can like crack our anti-cheat system, we will hire you to join the company.
Public service announcement for those listening. Many people think that's what DreamHack is sometimes. They don't know anything about it other than a name. But put that out there. This is not a dumb question from JV, because that's not what DreamHack does. Just saying.
It's true.
Because I had people ask me that.
I have heard stories like that, though, where companies have hired someone who has either successfully hacked their system to come in and help them improve security and remove that vulnerability. Where in games, I have heard the same stories of that these hackers are so successful that they're like, hey, we're doing this as a service to you, not to exploit the game. Here is what we found. We want this game to be fixed. Here you go. And they kind of hand off that knowledge and information, not damaging the community or the game, but just doing it from we observed this hole. And I am nowhere near that kind of technically savvy to understand that. And like Renessa said, that's not what we do here at DreamHack. We will hack your dreams, but not your games.
Yeah.
We don't do that.
Something really interesting, though, on the whole customer support and expense side. Have you guys seen anything about the new AI that writes poetry and argues law cases? And I popped up on my Twitter timeline. I can't even remember what it's called, to tell people listening to go Google it. But it is a new AI that looks remarkably advanced. It can code based on if you just give it normal English description of what you want, it'll write code for that. It legitimately wrote poetry that was not that bad. And so it's this incredibly advanced AI. And I look at something like that and I'm just like, what if you start implementing that? It's scary, to think about human jobs going away, but it's also, and it's scary because, you know, Skynet, but it's really interesting to see what AI
You dropped that way
creative
too
solutions.
casually, by the way. You dropped that way too casually, by the way. You're just like, well, you know, you might lose some jobs, and oh yeah, Skynet. But you know,
This is also coming from a Dota fan who has seen the AI
OpenAI,
bots play
yeah.
against pros. Like,
oh yeah.
that is scary to think of. But when you're talking about even our Fortnite tournament with 400,000
Mhm.
entrants in it, how as an admin do you brute force check reports that people are not playing by the rules
Yeah.
when you have numbers like that? And you're talking about communities that are millions, if
Mhm.
not tens or hundreds of millions of people. So that AI has a great ability to be able to dig in deep, start analyzing, and then bring it up to the surface at a volume level that we've never seen before.
You also have to think about language differences too. On previous
Mhm.
podcasts, we've talked about harassment issues and in-game toxicity. And it's really easy for us to sit here and say, well, here's a list of slurs in English. But are you really expecting a company to have the resources to globally understand every single different interaction and culture and, you know, those kinds of things? And so again, like AI balancing, fighting toxicity, all those things could be really huge changes in the way that games are balanced and dealt with in the future. And it's still
Absolutely.
scary.
If as a developer, I have a button on my website that
Mhm.
says donate to ban cheaters, do you guys donate?
Whoa.
Oh, I pushed that button. Well, hang on, hang on,
no.
hang
To
on.
help,
No.
help fund that gap?
No, because okay, you know what? Valve has that button. It's called the Battle Pass. All right, Valve's already got that button. They have milked that
Yeah.
button for a decade.
If you need additional revenue to fight cheaters, you need to create compelling content for the game, because that actually, you know, is going to keep player retention up as well. Because that's another big problem with cheating, is it can really mess up your player retention.
Absolutely. And
I gotta know how effective the people who are asking for the funding to catch the cheaters are.
At catching the cheaters, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you
Because
got
if
to have a
it's-
good
Yeah.
system.
Yeah. Because if it's a thing where they're like, hey, here's our proof of concept as to why you should donate. We have caught 0 people so far, but with your support, we can catch 1. It's not happening. It's not happening. Okay.
Some games have Overwatch systems, right? Like CS:GO has an Overwatch system where they have people in the game manually reviewing
I
reports.
felt really stupid because I thought
I
you were
removed-
like, some games have Overwatch systems.
No, I
Where there's
removed
6
Overwatch from my
players
system.
and 30 heroes.
But that could be a thing where, right, maybe you don't have automated bans, maybe it's not AI, but maybe you have incentives for Overwatch systems, not 6-player hero shooter queues, JV, that review accounts and do things like that. And then of course you have to be worried about abuse with that and people just looking for the reward. It's so this is the point. It's so hard to address any of this. And if you're just on Reddit complaining, there's so much. And I feel for developers, this is such a challenging question to address. Whether
Yeah,
it's an esport or just a game that people play.
The tribunal, I think, is what you're describing, that League of Legends had for a long time, to where if a report of toxicity or anything like that came across the board, you could register as a member of the tribunal community and go in and say yay or nay, was this person accused and did this, or did they not? And you get IP points, in-game points for League of Legends when you did that kind of stuff. And it was a really cool feedback system, and you got to feel involved in the process. Did anything ever happen from that? You got notified if people got banned. They let you know and all that kind of stuff. And there was 1 or 2 people that I would see a case come by and that I got notified that they were banned. But it felt like it was just a fan service of, you get to read through the juicy shit that people are spewing during their games. So if Renessa played League, I probably would have saw half of her fucking games reported
Excuse
in that
you, I have
era.
a very high behavior score. I almost never get reported.
Mm.
It's my stream that hears it.
That's right. That's
In-game
right.
doesn't know. Because that's mean. That's mean. I need to vent.
It is
I
true.
don't need
It
them
is
to
true.
experience it.
You
fair.
internalize all the toxicity and simply push it somewhere else.
Well, I don't want to actually be like mean to these people that are in my game and on my team. Like, yeah, they might do something dumb. So to prevent me being mean to them, I just have to vent it elsewhere.
Have you ever switched or messed up your push to talk and push to mute button? Maybe one time where a message that was supposed to go to stream ended up going in game instead, and that caused
I don't think
a bit of
so,
chaos.
because the way my buttons are set up,
Okay,
I think I'm saved from that one.
that's good.
They'll just go watch the video of themselves getting flamed
Oh,
while
that
you're
happens.
just yeah,
That
yeah.
straight
Don't
up
doubt that at
happens.
all.
Yeah, she's probably not putting TTV Renessa in the tag anytime soon.
Oh, I do. They know.
Oh, no.
Yes, people
No.
know that I'm a streamer. They know. And
Oh,
they watch
no.
at their own risk.
Oh, so poor little Timmy just played a game of Dota thinking that they did all right, and they jump on your stream like, hey, thanks for the game, but because the Twitch is 30-second delay, you're just like, man, Timmy, what a garbage player. Just an absolute dumpster fire in
You know,
mid-play.
if Timmy were smarter, he wouldn't broadcast about the fact, oh my god, you're a streamer! I'm gonna save the girl, we must save the girl, protect the streamer. But little Timmy does that, and I know they're watching, so then little Timmy gets his head flamed off.
But little Timmy's just trying to be your Twitch mod and control your whole life. It gives him a
Let's not
sense of
talk about
pride
that
and a
game.
Oh, no,
As far
no,
as
no,
balance updates,
no.
that one just needs a wave of fire coming at it for a balance update.
Yeah, we've opened
Not
the
touching
can of
that one.
worms.
No,
We're not touching
no,
it.
no,
Is
we're
that-
moving on.
hang on, is that-
PlayStation fans out there,
I
pick a
know-
different console.
I don't want to move, but let me just say this: is that trailer the pride and accomplishment comment in trailer form? I think that's what it is. I think that trailer took the spirit of EA's Reddit comment and was just like, let's put this all in one game trailer. 'Cause I've
Unfortunately
never seen
not,
something
because
so
there's a lot of
huge.
people who are trying to defend it.
Yes.
That comment was universally disliked.
Yes, 600,000
However,
downvotes disliked.
Yeah.
That other game has people trying to defend it right now, and it's an absolute train wreck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that such a weird game. I'll wait for the full thing to come out before I like put its final verdict on whether it's like a piece of trash or not. But it's not looking good, Chief. It's not looking good at all for that game.
I'm not feeling the redemption arcs there.
Yeah,
Probably- yeah,
that's not one
probably
of the
not.
games that yeah.
The redemption arc for that game is they invent a time machine and go back in time to an era before that
No,
trailer.
the
was-
redemption arc is that it's a giant troll. And that you
Oh, yeah.
enter in the game and that's what plays, and then there's a record scratch. And instead it is some completely different game. Just they're like wildly different. Some crazy socially liberal awareness building type thing that they get all these people to buy in thinking it's something else and complete flip. That would be the redemption arc.
That would be funny.
That would be very fun.
I'd watch that on Twitch happen.
Oh,
So,
man.
Vanessa, we talked last week about
Mhm.
how the game that you play is dead.
Yes,
So-
Pokemon MOBA's killing Dota.
Killing Dota off completely.
Yeah.
So, like, obviously, they didn't do a good job of balancing that game. So,
Mhm.
if you're not playing anything else at the moment, can you, like, talk us through what Dota has done to lead to that death?
Oh, no. Dota's dead. It's dead. I discovered The
okay.
Witcher 3.
Oh,
There's
uh-oh.
no turning back. I
I
am forever just fully entrenched in that game. Dota is gone. I have to like psych myself up to even consider playing it, and that has failed multiple times. And I've just sat here. Plus, like controller games. Let me demonstrate for audio listeners. I'm sorry, you're gonna miss out. Controller games, I could like slouch down, playing like this, all kinds of weird
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
And Dota, you
Just
have to
lean
have
into the scoliosis.
perfect posture. You have to be super intense all the time. No. So, thank you. That was my acting of my Dota playing.
So friendship ended with Dota. Now The Witcher 3 is my best friend.
Yeah, that's what happened. But so as I'm in the process of posing questions, so Dota is one of those games, like I said, that caters to the pro scene. Hardcore, right? Patches only drop when tournaments end. I have no idea what the dev sleep schedules look like, because seriously, you will have a tournament in China that ends at 6 a.m. and there is a patch 20 minutes later. So I don't know what their schedules look like. That could be a different conversation about crunch culture. But they're very good about building their patches around competitive. Not that hard to, since there's usually only one major tournament going on. You're not really going to interrupt anything else. But they've gone through several different update cycles. Way back when, it was kind of like every 6 months, there would be a major game-changing update. At one point, they tried to have balance patches every 2 weeks. And it was always scheduled at the same time. There's a patch every 2 weeks. And I would say the more recent approach is that they actually tell you when a patch is coming instead of surprise drop it. It's not an amazing timeline, but they kind of let you know. And it's like very haphazard. You don't really know when it's going to happen. You don't know how long the current patch is going to last. And you kind of have to judge based on Reddit complaining to know. So those are 3 systems. You're an esports pro. Which system do you want?
Post-tournament?
Yes, but so it's always post-tournament.
Always?
So do
No
you
matter
want
what?
big changes twice a year? Do you want smaller changes regularly every 2 weeks? Or do you want absolutely no clue when it's going to happen or how big it'll be?
So I would prefer kind of a little bit of a combination of a couple of them. So I think it's really important to save big balance changes for those, whether it's once a quarter or twice a year or whatever. I think once a quarter is, kind of a good cadence, because the nice duality of balance patches is that on the one hand, you're fixing bugs. On the other hand, it gives you an opportunity to shake up the game meta. If you do that too much, it messes with the players and people don't like it. If you save it and you do a meta change every quarter, right, then you end up actually doing things that are compelling for the player base. So for me, I think that that's kind of where your best opportunity lies for games that are games as a service, right, like Fortnite, Destiny, etc., because you're just going to help players have different ways to play the game in the future, as well as squashing bugs. And then also letting players know about it, but not super far in advance, I think is key. Like you let them know a week or two, maybe, if that. And sometimes you just drop something because it's super cool and you just drop it and you let somebody discover it. And that ends up creating really positive sentiment in the community and everybody has a good time.
But if you're an esports player, competitive.
Yeah, if you're in the competitive side and you're entrenched in all of these changes and how...
And you've got a coach and you've got strats and you've been practicing scrims and stuff.
You change the mana cost of a spell. That's something that's really common because you can say that someone's a little too overpowered because they can cast too frequently. And looking at those kinds of mechanics, that'll redefine an entire character in a game like Dota or League. Whereas making a minor adjustment in a map in Call of Duty is not that big of a deal in comparison, where if you have completely dedicated yourself into that one champion, that can throw off your entire play style. I have a friend that exclusively plays Elder Titan, and he is always hyped whenever there's tweaks and changes to Elder Titan.
Yeah, I could see that. It's mostly an ignored hero that as a premise can be incredibly broken. That's Dota in a nutshell, though. So like, take that with a grain of salt. But okay, so Kyle, you're an esports pro, and you've got to look at either I've got 6 months to grind, I've got an unknown amount of time to grind, or
I'm an esports pro that can't hear you talking at the moment, so hold a moment while my headphones turn back on.
We'll get Kyle back here in a moment. Okay, so
I'm back.
You're an esports pro. And you can also have to think about there's multiple levels of pros, right? There's the really, really successful teams that are crushing it. There's the low-end teams looking for that like one-hit wonder strat. Do you want every 2 weeks so that, it's all about who can adapt the fastest? Do you want every 6 months so that you can really train and grind, or no clue and you just kind of hope?
I think it goes back to successful models that we've seen outside of esports. And whenever you see major rule changes coming into professional sports, they happen postseason. So if there is a season of play, or if there is like a TI that is a giant marker for kind of like the year that starts and ends for Dota, I think that you save majority of the bigger patches for a lump at one time, just to keep the competitive integrity of the environment stable. Because without that, you're going to have an environment that is just chaotic, and it's hard to grow out of that chaos. Or sometimes it's just so rapidly changing that you have a shuffle all the time, and there's no consistency for viewership, and you don't get these personalities built up as far as they could go. So keeping it on an annual or a semi-annual basis to where they can say, big patch, things are changing, that sounds good to me. But I do know the nuance of the game is so much more than that, to where you can't just say, we're going to stop making changes for 6 months, because if you do that, your game will die, because they are so complex. You cannot balance every champion versus every champion for every scenario unless you have in-depth AI that is doing all of this kind of in the background and saying, I've played 800,000 games this week.
You want to replace Ice Frog with AI? What blasphemy is this?
Yeah, blasphemy. That's what it is. It's just smart, because you can play a million games simulated and see every scenario that you can try and come up with, to the point where you can now say, oh yeah, he'll go eat that tree over there because that's the only out for him. That's the level that you can get to with trying to balance a game that's like so big. So I think the bigger patches are necessary for stability's sake, but in order to maintain an everyday balance of the game, small tweaks, and defining what small means is something that is impossible to do.
I disagree.
Depends entirely upon the game.
Disagree,
Oh,
Jamie.
boy.
What would you do?
I disagree, because people are inherently dodos. That's why. That's why.
The bird, not the game.
So I'm coming.
We are flightless. That's fair.
I'm coming at it from a fighting game standpoint, right?
Uh-huh.
And I think probably one of the best games to look at for this would be a game like Super Smash Brothers Melee. It's actually a very good example as to why you shouldn't trust people's gut instincts, because initially among the top of the tier list was Link in Melee, because he had an option where he could, I believe it was like he could do his grab into like a spin attack confirm, and people were like, this is so broken, and they're like, oh, don't worry about Fox, he's like okay, right? Now this game, which has had no balance patches, by the way, all these years later, Link is nowhere near the top of the tier list, right? Nowhere near that. And that, again, is because people's knee-jerk reactions on what's good, what's bad, is very often wrong. It's just wrong. And I think that instead of trying to tweak constantly based on knee-jerk reactions, you kind of have to let things figure themselves out, because those day one reactions are so deeply different from what actually pertains with the meta itself, right?
But here's a question for you. Dota, because, you know, that's what I know. The International 4. So a Dota game, on average, anybody who plays MOBAs, you're looking for 30 minutes or longer for your games normal. The International 4 rolls around. It was my first one that I went to. And I was out of the stadium by 5 p.m. every day, because the games were 16 to 22 minutes long. Because you won one fight, and you marched down mid lane, and you took their base, and you destroyed them. Today, the day of recording, so yesterday, when this releases, is the anniversary of the grand finals of TI, and the 4 or 5 game series took 82 minutes total. That's
bad series.
Yeah, it was awful. It was one of the most anticlimactic things in existence, because that entire patch was poorly balanced for the entirety of the patch, that it was just this snowball push meta that was miserable to play. If they didn't fix that immediately, you would have lost the entire player base, because every single game was the same.
But I think that that's very different in my mind, right? Like, there are some things you can look at and be like, this is objectively super game breaking, like not the way that we intended things to go by any means, right? That people are exploiting, and you can step in at times to do that. But I still think that it is fair to give the community time to adjust to the balance patches you've put out yourself, instead of being so knee-jerky and constantly being like, let's fix this, let's fix this, let's fix this, let's fix this. Like, I guess for me, like, I like the idea of like updating something with like a big patch, like maybe once a year, if not 6 months. And then the only time you can do like a hot patch is if something is just fundamentally broken and not good, and there is no counterplay for it whatsoever. Because again, I really do feel like a lot of times it's just, even if there's so many players now that all have access to the internet, which means they're all talking constantly, and even though that half-life of being able to solve a meta has been reduced so drastically from, say, the days of Melee dropping, I still think that there is just so many unknowns in regards to how people themselves use the framework of the game to be able to actually excel at that game, right? Like, until we make it so that there's true mastery at that specific meta, then the idea that screw it, there's like, a comment on Reddit that has like 1,000 upvotes that says that this patch sucks, from Barney Slayer 27, like, let's just change it right now. Like, no, just give it time to breathe, right? Let it percolate just a little bit, right? And really, I think what the really good devs can do is they have an eye to know, like, this is good discussion around the game, and this is healthy discussion that we need, and we know that if we just wait a little bit, things will settle themselves out. And also having that same eye to be like, oh god, we released this broken, utter, disgusting pile of filth that just needs to be purged from this game immediately. Bayonetta Smash 4. But
I knew that was coming.
Yeah, we were ready. We were prepared.
That's just how it is.
It's interesting also to think about what the schedule looks like with all these different proposed things. Because when I think of a 2-week update schedule, you have to be miserable as a dev to make that happen.
Ugh.
Because with large, complicated if you had 3 characters, the QAing on that's so much easier. But when you have a huge game and you make one small change, or these patches say it's like 20 little changes, who knows what spaghetti code you're breaking, who knows what random stuff. So then you hit harder crunch culture, you have more bugs, you have more server breakdowns, which means people can't even play when the patch comes out. All right, JV, I feel like spaghetti code threw you off there.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like Chef Boyardee code right now, like what that would even look like.
A bunch of 1s and 0s inside your spaghetti.
Yeah. Spaghetti-o code.
Oh gosh, honestly, I would not be surprised to see that moving forward. Now that gamer culture and nerdy is chic advertising for everybody.
It's Leet Speak SpaghettiOs.
Oh gosh, please don't allow.
We got
Kyle
numbers
to get
in there
into marketing
too.
Ever.
Oh god.
Ever.
Oh god.
JV, it sounds like you're all for the developers having their art experienced.
Yeah,
is what it sounds like. You
100%.
you trust them enough to know what they're doing and say this game is set. I have an example of one that I can kind of say, like, this is not esports related now, but we're going into more of like the community appeasing side of things. And when you have a lot of potential content and a lot of brute force to get through that content and push and push and push and push, we've seen what that can kind of do. And an example of a shining example of this content being pushed through is kind of what Fortnite does with that Infinity Blade. That took that entire game, upended it on its side and said, like, we don't care about balance at all. And they've even come out and said that that was a mistake, to the point where they were like, oh, this was not a good experience for our community. We did not do this right. They need to get back to the drawing board and figure out how they can introduce cool content pieces with some of the coolest brands in the fucking world. Star Wars, Marvel, the NFL, all parts of what they've been able to do cool things with. But has that brought competitive integrity to that game, or has it brought more of a just fan appeasing?
I think that's adjacent though, right? Like when you're talking, so something like the Infinity Blade, that definitely kind of kills the competitive integrity, right? Because they released it on the day of a tournament, and we're just like, have fun, figure it out, right? It's a very clear idea where they valued the marketing and the eyeballs of seeing people go crazy with that over the competitive experience of those players themselves trying to figure out how the hell they operate in this Infinity Blade meta.
Marketing is
right?
a great point to even put there, right? Because look at most esports, And the esports scene is their marketing. A $30 million Dota tournament is Dota's marketing. Call of Duty's marketing is hugely centered around that. Well, Call of Duty's a little different, but still, like the $4 million league. A lot of Overwatch's marketing was pushed around Overwatch League and CSGO. It's the same thing. Fortnite is really not. It really, takes. Esports has always been kind of the smallest sector when you look at the actual numbers, but it's been a huge marketing play. Fortnite, their esports is not a marketing play. Their pro AM charity tournaments are big. Yep. Marshmallow playing in game is big. All those integrations Kyle was talking about, that's their marketing. Esports is kind of like, yeah, this is cool. Have fun.
Yeah, I agree. I think that one thing that Epic does a really good job of is having something, like I've said it so many times, but again, like when you're looking at balance and providing things for a game, you're really looking at 3 games essentially, right? Yeah. You're looking at competitive, intermediate, beginner. And what the team that's working on Fortnite does a really good job of, in my opinion, is they have a really keen eye on what to give each of those communities, right? It hasn't always been perfect, especially at a top level. But when we talk about things like the Travis Scott concert, that they did in game, right?
Integrations.
Yeah, and very recently, the Black Manta Aquaman drops that they did in game, right? That's all really good stuff that appeases the beginners and the intermediate folk, and probably some of the competitive folk too, right? That's all really great. And I think that the Infinity Blade was a really good wake-up call for them too, where they're now thinking very critically on how we can make a better game for competitive play also.
Well,
right?
When you have a game that big too, again, obviously I'm going to keep going back to Dota. It's easy to know when to balance patch Dota because there's one big tournament at a time, because the tournament organizers all kind of talk. Fortnite's too big for that. We had 400,000 people enter. It's just what? Like that's just ridiculous. Like DreamHack. We have a lot of esports. We're known for those. We got a lot of that going on, right? Like we're gonna have good numbers for esports, but that takes it to an entirely new level. And when you think about the number of Fortnite tournaments and activations and charity events and big streamers, and it's like there's no way to hit that timing perfectly ever. You can't do it. And so I do think, the Infinity Blade, like you said, made them sort of open their eyes a little bit on how to handle that. I think we've actually seen them give a lot more warning now when something is coming.
Definitely.
When there's a big concert that might break the game or have a limited people in it or whatever, you know about that for a long time. Nobody is going to organize a Fortnite tournament at the same time. They're going to know. And I think that's been probably the most important step for any developer with any balances is communication.
Absolutely. Without that, we're all just sitting in the dark wondering what will happen to the games that we love and hope that it'll be better the next time we log in to play, or maybe our builds are just totally fucked and we can't do anything anymore. That's TFT in a nutshell right now. Every time I log in and play a game, like, they balanced and Jarvan doesn't work anymore, so no one's picking them, and perfect, I can pick all the Jarvans up now. But he's still garbage because they patched him and I didn't look, and those hot fixes are sneaky sometimes. They can change a lot.
Yeah.
But that is the world that we live in, and the tournament organizer life is not something that's super easy to manage because of all these different aspects that have to be taken into account. And it's impressive to just think for a second that we are handling a 400,000 person tournament as DreamHack. I actually don't know what the largest tournament in the world ever hosted is. Is this going to hit that? Is that?
Well, I think the Fortnite, we're up there, I think, when it comes to third-party tournaments. I believe the Fortnite World Cup was like something stupid, like 40 million players or something. But that's, just people participating, at a certain time or place, more or less.
So one of the great things, too, is that we love esports. We all, involved with DreamHack. We see it. We love video games and everything. And it's always been a big thing, but Fortnite has completely transformed what we consider big, and it has sort of brought so many more eyeballs and also like a new generation And it's defining so much of how everything's going to work. Like their in-game events and content and updates and the way they push things out, you cannot say that that is not holding everybody else's feet to the fire on how to be creative, how to communicate,
Definitely.
how to balance their game, how to work with people. That's the coolest thing. Like I obviously don't play it. It's not my jam. I think that's fine. But it just impresses the heck out of me.
Boomer.
Witcher 3. Witcher
No.
3.
I'm in the same boat as Vanessa, right? Where I also, I don't play Fortnite, but I think it does such a great job of codifying the fact that esports matters. Like when
Yeah.
a 16-year-old kid walks away with that much money
Ooh, yeah.
at the Fortnite World Cup last year,
Yeah.
like it has such a big, sizable impact. I mean, even locally, I live nearby the esports stadium in Arlington, right? Really great group of folks there, and they were telling me that, you know, they would do these Fortnite weeklies, and normally they'd have like a fairly modest turnout, maybe 30 people, something like that. After that Fortnite World Cup happened, they had to turn people away. I think they had like 250 competitors, and their parents drug them along too. Like, hey, can I see you playing? Go make us some money. You know, like it is changing the cultural zeitgeist so much in regards to not only how people view esports, right? But
Mhm.
more importantly, how people can leverage gaming as a platform in and of itself, right? Like that's so crazy to me to think that we saw a couple of like a trailer drop for the movie Tenet. Like there was dedicated marketing spend. Somebody has a marketing plan out there at Warner Brothers that's just like, and we actually saved this much for a Fortnite activation. Like that's crazy. That's insane to think about. Like who would have ever thought that we would live in a world where video games are marketed by games that have nothing to, or sorry, movies are marketed by games that have nothing to do with the movie. That is
Yeah, that's
insane.
that is a paradigm.
It's pretty absolutely
shift.
wild.
Yeah, the engine that is Fortnite is impressive in every single way that you can look at that thing. And the fact that we're running a tournament for it as DreamHack is pretty cool. And the community involvement, like you said, getting parents out and being a part of their kids' gaming lives. It's almost like watching Little League when you watch it happen in person. And it's adorable. I love seeing parents come support their kids' esports streams. That's one of the most heartwarming things that I see at our shows. And the fact that we get to do that with Fortnite, one of the biggest communities out there, is absolutely magical. And I don't think that there's going to be many other games that have this momentum and energy behind them like a Fortnite does right now. So I'm really happy that our organization gets to be a part of this momentum to move it forward. But we have a little bit more also going on at DreamHack, not just Fortnite, like we've talked about excessively at the moment. We actually have
really
had
excited about Fortnite. Okay, we have to give them their airtime because they deserve it. That enthusiasm deserves it.
Yeah,
Yep.
definitely.
Yep. And when you go into that Discord, if you do happen to be a Fortnite player, find your right channel, find your right admins. Don't bug
Please
all the
stop
DreamHack staff,
DMing
please.
me.
Come on.
You guys are gonna get spammed so much.
I don't know anything.
Look before you ask. The answers are there.
Unless it's
You
real
must look.
Gizmo, and then ask him any time of day. He's there to help. He loves
Just
you.
tell him your whole life story. In the
I'm going to get you a
DMs.
Nintendo 64 controller and teach you Fortnites on that. I think that's how this works.
That'd be pretty funny.
James
But I think
Bond
this is all the
dropping in
time we
the
have for our
battle
show
bus.
today. I think we've actually gone over and pushed into a little bit more.
It's gonna be
because
a little
this
bit of a long
balance
one.
topic.
That's okay.
But we are going to sign off now. And until you guys are able to join us next time, thank you all for watching, and thank you for listening to another episode of the DreamHack Download, everything gaming all under one podcast. You can find us on all the podcast platforms and YouTube. That's a great place to come find us. Spotify, Apple, Podbean, and Stitcher are some of the other places.
You
If
got
you
it right,
use
buddy.
some of the more
Flawless execution.
Yeah.
I know, right?
It was
Flawless
great. It was a good,
execution here on this
strong
outro.
sign-off.
Killing this outro.
But please join us in the future. Thank you again to our sponsors, Blue Microphone and Razer, for joining us on this show as well. And until next time, we'll see you soon.